My name is Sarah Massingale, and I am with the Library of Congress Share Your Story project. I'm here at the 38th Annual Vietnam Veteran Reunion with Army veteran Joe Kramer, who has agreed to share his story for the Library of Congress Veteran History Project and the Nebraska Vietnam Memorial Park Project. Joe, let's begin with your full name and where you were born.
Joe Kramer. I was born in Vermillion, South Dakota, and so I'm not even a Nebraskan. And my mom was from Vermillion, so my dad was from Nebraska, and we lived in York, Nebraska, and I graduated from high school in York, Nebraska in 1968. And when I get out of school, you go through these decisions. Well, what do you want to do with your life? I guess I worked for a year and a half, like more construction type work, and I said, well, this ain't no future in this, so
Sure.
I decided to join the Army, and I come back and told my dad I joined the Army. He looked at me, like, are you crazy? And so I did it anyway, and a date was set, and we got on a bus and headed for Omaha, and went to the induction center in Omaha and got all your processing done. Wish they done weird things to you. And so I at that point, when I was done in Omaha, they said the next step was to get on a plane. Well, I never flew in a plane before. I didn't know experience. That was a new experience for me, was to be on a plane. And so it was just a short trip. It was from Omaha to Kansas City.
Were you scared of flying?
Well, I was kind of a little apprehensive about flying on a plane because it's something I never did before.
Mm.
And so we got on the plane, and then we headed to Fort Polk, Louisiana, and we made stops like in Kansas City. That was a short flight. I don't think he even got up in the air very far before he got to Kansas City. And then we were made stops in like Dallas and Houston. Then our last stop was in not Shreveport, but Lake Charles, Louisiana. And we got off the plane there, and it was so darn hot there that you're just unbelievable. You're just sweating, just walking around. And there we got on buses, and for the rest of the journey down to Fort Polk. And when we got to Fort Polk, they herded us out of the bus, and we had to get in some kind of a formation there. And then we found out what we were in for. And so we spent a week there doing different things. You get your famous haircut, and you get your uniforms, and you had to put your uniforms on and make sure they fit you, and then you had to box up your old clothes, and they got shipped home so you wouldn't be tempted to wear them. And then you took your testing. You took a bunch of tests to see what you were capable of doing. And once all that got done, then they assigned you to a unit where you had then basic training started. And that was a eye-opening experience, that you didn't know what to expect, and all the yelling around and different obstacles you'd go through, anything just to get you in shape. Once we got through with basic training, you decided what you were going to do in the future. Like, you took advanced training, like AIT they called it. AIT, most of the people, not everybody, but most of the people I were with were sent to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. So we hopped on a bus in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and headed for Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. Seemed like it took a long time to get there. We went through Little Rock, Arizona, or Little Rock, Arkansas, I mean, and when we got to AIT, they assigned you to a unit and you started all over again with your training. So I spent 8 weeks there training as a construction utilities worker. And when I got through with that, they selected some of us to go on to further training to be a different MOS. And it was a construction inspector, they called it at the time, and now later I see that same MOS was also a construction supervisor. So whatever you wanted to call it, we got that after I think we spent another 6 months doing that training. And from there they figured we had enough training, so they were going to decide where we're going. Well, we all knew where we were going. We were going to Vietnam anyway, regardless. So we took a little leave, and then when we got done with that, we come back and we all got that orders to report to Oakland Army Base, which is across the bay from San Francisco. So we all reported there. We didn't all go together. It was kind of everybody was on their own commercial flights, and everybody arrived at different times. And I think there's 13 of us. And we got to Oakland Army Base, and then there they kind of sorted you out into different units and what flight you're taking. And thing I remember most about, the only real thing I remember from that place was they had a roll call about every 2 hours to make sure you're still there, you didn't bail out on them. And I think he spent probably a day or two there, but I'm not sure. Then they shipped us up to Travis Air Force Base, which was further north up there. Then they shipped us, or then we got on a plane up there and we headed out. Our first stop was in Hawaii, which was kind of interesting. I remember the pilot tilting the plane so we could see Pearl Harbor. Then we landed at the airport, and then we after they got refueled, and then we headed off to a strange place called Wake Island. Well, I didn't know nothing about Wake Island. We got to Wake Island, and we were all walking around there, and I think, gosh, this place has got a lot of history to it. And Wake Island was a battle in World War II that the Japanese took over the island eventually, and a lot of atrocities were committed there over the years of Japanese occupation. And I didn't know that all the time while I was there. I learned that all later by reading books and studying history and what the history of the place was, and I think, oh gosh, that's terrible. And so we got the plane refueled and we headed up again. Then we headed to Okinawa. And we got off the plane at Okinawa. There's another refueling stop, and that was about the hottest place I can recall ever being, just really humid there. And so we refueled, and then we headed to, our next stop was at Bien Airfield in Vietnam, which is about 20 or 30 miles north of Saigon. When we arrived at Bien Airfield, as I could remember looking out the window of the plane, and I seen these people down in these rice paddies working. And I said, this is kind of strange. I never seen anything like this before. But they were down there planting their rice or harvesting their rice or whatever they were doing, and not even paying attention to us at all. Plane landed, and we got out of the plane, and they immediately put us in a group. And then we were divided, and we stayed there for a couple days, and every so often they'd check to see that everybody was there yet. I don't know where you were going to go, but and then they decided you go to a replacement battalion after that, which was in Long Bend, which is to the south of Benoit, north of Saigon too. So we spent, I don't know, maybe it was a week. Maybe it was a few days. I don't remember. But then that's where they decided what they were going to do with you. Some people, it was already predetermined that you were already assigned to a unit, so off you went. But I was never assigned to a unit, so I had to wait there till they assigned me to a unit. And when they finally decided what they were going to do with me, they were going to send me to a place called Vung Tau, which was kind of a resort area. It was an R&R center, and a place where they sent in-country people for R&R. And so they sent me there, and I was assigned. I never really was assigned to a unit like, you got a company or a platoon or any of that stuff. I had a staff sergeant and a second lieutenant were the only two people there besides me. And so our job was to overlook projects, a civilian company that did work over there, like it was called PANE, which was Pacific Architects and Engineers. And we kind of overseen their work. And mainly our interest mostly was in road construction. And we had rock and stuff we had to account for. Now rock came from a quarry and was on barges. And they unloaded these barges where they needed them, where there's a plant. They made asphalt and for road construction. Well, when they got, I don't know, I just got tired of the place after a while, so I asked for a transfer. I tried to transfer in another unit, but they said I wasn't authorized, so then I just asked for a transfer in general, so they sent me back to Saigon. When I got into Saigon, they tried different things with me, like one thing they were trying to make me do, which I hated, was drive for a colonel. And I wasn't, I didn't really care for all the
Sure.
military jargon that was associated with that, so I got out of that in a hurry. And there's another guy that was leaving country. And that position was open, but they must have found somebody else to fill it, but it wasn't going to be me. And I don't know what else. I don't think they found anything else for me there, but they sent me off to a place called Canto, which is deeper into the Delta, across the rivers and down south there. And I got there, and I had kind of the basic, simple type of work I was doing up there. We had to account for all the road construction material, the rock, which was sent by barges. And you don't think of a rock quarry in the Delta, but in Canto, did the same type of work. We had to account for the rock that was being crushed at a quarry. And so it was shipped on barges again to wherever it was needed. And we, and I had to go out different sites and measure how much rock was there and how much was needed and for road construction. We built a lot of roads over there, asphalt roads, and once it was unloaded, they had dump trucks come in and load it up and haul away to wherever it was needed. And at one of these sites I went to one time, there was a barge parked in the river, and I thought, well, I'm gonna go over. There was Americans on it, and I went over there, and here there was a guy that I went over with. He was in charge of this barge, and I haven't seen him since he went over there, and so we visited a little bit, and I kind of got to know him again. But that's what his job was, protecting that site where the rock was, because there was a lot of stealing that would go on at night, and people would haul bushel baskets full of rock out of there. But they did, a lot of that rock that went on the barges, it went on by hand. They hired Vietnamese to load it.
Wow. And
then they shipped it upriver wherever they needed it and unloaded it. And so that was basically what I did down there. But we had a rock quarry down in the southwestern part of Vietnam, and I don't remember the name of the town. I did find it on a Google map one time, and it looks like a rock quarry still there.
Wow.
And so that's where the rock all originated from down there. And they had the crushers and this and that, and I got a lot of pictures of it. But so we would take a trip down there every so often and check it out, Well, all we had was just me and the lieutenant that drove the Jeep down there. We didn't have any other escort or anything, And so we a little apprehensive sometimes. You don't know what you were going to run across. But we had an M16 is all we had with one clip, and the captain had the lieutenant had a pistol, and so that was our only protection. If somebody was going to come after us, you just well throw your hands in the air and
oh Lord
and move on. But I don't know how many times I went down there, but at least a half a dozen times. And it was the same old process down there. They crushed the rock there, and they had ladies out there that would gather up the rock. They'd use explosives to get it out of this cliff. Well, you don't think of a rock quarry down there. It's all flat and wet. But there is some hills down there in that part of the country that do have rock in them. Mm. And so we were there one time, and the lieutenant said, well, should we go to Cambodia? And I said, well, I don't know if I want to go to Cambodia or not. But we could see where Cambodia was from up on that little mountain. And I said, no, I don't think that's a good idea. That was right after we withdrew from Cambodia after our adventure there. And so we just come back home and do the same thing again. I guess the only eventful thing we ever had on that road was one time in the far distance you could see somebody in the road. I said, what in the world is this going on,
Oh, what you want to see.
So we got a little closer, and here there's some guy kind of dancing in the middle of the road. And I thought, this is very unusual. Is that some kind of a decoy, or what was it? No, we were a little apprehensive, but I said, well, we're stuck right here. We ain't gonna The only way is run for it, so we speeded up and stepped on the gas and got around this guy. But nothing ever happened. And so we kept on and made it back home. And that was the extent of that little trip. But when we got, and I can remember one time we were heading, I was by myself or something, and I don't know why I was by myself, but it was in Canto, and I sensed that there was something strange going on, and so I kind of looking around, and I seen this truck ahead of us is a troop carrier of some sort, and I said, what in the world is all these guys had their eyes fixed on me, there's like 10 guys in the back of that troop carrier, and they all were staring right at me. I said that made me a little nervous, but then I figured out a little bit later that it was they were all prisoners. And so I just went on around them. I didn't like that scene. And they were taking them to a prison camp somewhere, but they really had their eyes fixed on me. Then another time going out west of town there's some guy that stepped in front of me, and then they go through a scene, well, it looks like he's really crippled and this and that, but he walked away, I didn't think he was injured too bad. But then a crowd started to gather, so I said, well, this ain't a good place to be. So I decided to move on there, so I sped up and got out of there in a hurry. You don't want to get involved in a crowd. No. And so those are a few eventful things we had going down there. Then sometimes we'd take a helicopter and we'd go out and do the same thing. We'd check the roads by helicopter. And I was never on a helicopter before, so that was a new experience. The first time I got on down at Vung Tau on a helicopter, the pilot took us over the ocean. Then he had that helicopter tilted just right where you thought you were going to fall out of there.
Oh, no.
And I said, well, that's whatever it is, And they had seatbelts in there, but I don't know if I had it fastened or not. But this helicopter got back on, I don't know if he's trying to scare us or what, but we got back on track and headed to where we were going. But you seen some interesting things from a helicopter too. You went over one area and all it was bomb craters.
Wow.
And we'd take it down at Canto, we'd take it out and head west out of town there to, I don't think we went to this rock quarry, but we were looking at the roads going down that way. It was quicker than driving, but sometimes it could have been more dangerous. So that was some of the adventures on the road. Then but we stayed where I stayed, or I think the lieutenant stayed in a little compound on the southwest part of Canto. It was called Eakin Compound, I remember. And it had just about everything in there that you need. It was a guarded place, and of course they had guard towers around it. And so we stayed in there, and I kept my rifle with me at all times in there. Nobody ever knew I had it. And so they did inspections. They'd come around and do an inspection every so often, and they'd give you a warning ahead of time that there's going to be an inspection. And with the inspection, they had kind of a loudspeaker or something. You got 15 minutes to throw all your contraband, knives, guns, dope, drugs, whatever, into this trash can. So I seen where I heard a thump every so often. But I didn't throw my gun in there. I hid it in someplace where they couldn't find it.
Smart man.
I wasn't going to give it up because we needed it every day. And occasionally we'd take a helicopter out of there. And one time I remember we came back there. We had an office downtown we went to occasionally, and I remember we drove past. There was a soccer field right there. We drove past, and well, there was a area that was some helicopters were parked there, and we kind of thought that was kind of strange. Well, here we looked a little closer, and here there was apparently there was a bunch of bodies laying out there, covered up with blankets. I don't know what the story on it was, but we just noticed that. And when I was by myself a few times, I get a little bit of a lead foot going downtown there. And we had MPs that in the area that would monitor the roads. And they'd stop me a couple times and told me I was speeding. Well, I argued with them a couple times, and they said, okay, well, we can go downtown and talk about this. I said, no, that's not necessary. Do whatever you have to do. And then they sent a letter to I think he was a major, that I was doing this, you know. And then the major, I heard him tell the lieutenant or something, just send him a letter back and tell him that he's made aware of the conditions, and, you know, it wasn't nothing real big. But anyway, those are a few experiences we had out on the road. I'm sure I could think of some more if I thought long and hard about it, but.
So the major didn't make you walk to Canto after that?
No.
Or? No?
No, he didn't say nothing. Nobody said anything to me.
Good man.
And so we brushed that off. I kind of watched my speed after that, though. We had this little office downtown there, and it was guarded by Vietnamese. There were private security guards, and so it wasn't. It was in the middle of town, and we weren't too concerned about anything going on there, except for we had some local people had corn planted up to our building.
Oh, wow.
And then one night the corn all disappeared. So we thought it was probably rats that ate the corn, you know. We don't know, but it was gone.
Huh. It was appropriated.
Yeah. And I don't know of any other experiences. I could probably think of more. We had in our compound, we had a EM club in there where you could go in there and like a little bar. And when you weren't doing something, you went in, everybody was in there drinking. Which I don't know if that's a good idea or not, but everybody did it.
And you guys never got into any trouble
No.
after drinking at the EM club?
No, they didn't.
None that you'll tell?
They didn't bother you
Okay.
too much on that kind of stuff. Well, one other thing I was going to mention, another thing that was a little strange down in that area, we had, if you're familiar with the Delta down there, it's got the Mekong River, which comes from, I don't know where, China, or goes through Cambodia and Thailand and different places. It's a big river. We got nothing around here to compare to it. And there was no bridges to get across that river. And so we had to take a ferry across that river. And so we had to get in a line and wait for the ferry. Then all of a sudden you can see this cloud of dust coming from a distance. Well, here comes the Arvin troops. They're going to crash that ferry. They're going to bolt their way on there ahead of us, you know. So we just had to kind of squeeze our way in there, and and it was crowded in there. You're right next to vehicle here, and 6 inches away was another vehicle. And you thought, oh, this is kind of not a good situation either, you know. So we thought, well, somebody could just throw a grenade or something in on you, but nothing ever happened. And going from Kanto to Saigon, I think we had to take 2 ferries. Like I say, there are no bridges at that time. Now you look at pictures over there and they got nice bridges across the river. And we'd get off and we'd head our way and head up to Saigon. And I can't remember any incidents along that road, but it wasn't the safest place to be. But
I can see how that ferry crossing that bottleneck would cause anxiety.
I got a lot of pictures of those ferries and stuff. They were kind of, you think, well, would you ever ride on that?
Oh, no.
But we did. And I don't know how deep that river was, but I couldn't swim, so I didn't worry about it. And that was the only thing is everybody was rushing toward the ferry when they seen it coming, you know. So you had to make your move to get on there. And we get across the rivers, and then there was a road all the way to Saigon. And we took it, we had to come back the same way. But sometimes we'd take an airplane, get a ride on a C-130 or something and head up there. But we went up there frequently then had that headquarters at Tonsanut. We'd wind up in there sometimes. And that was kind of not the place I wanted to be, because you had all the brass from I'm thinking at the time like Westmoreland and Abrams and all, they had offices in there, and I didn't want to be meeting up with those guys in there. And then I didn't know this till afterwards, but I didn't see it and I don't recall us seeing it, but there's supposedly a big sign on the back of the building that says, "This is the last time you'll be saluting anybody, so salute this picture," or whatever it was.
Wow.
And I can't remember seeing that, but somebody was telling me about that. But that was, and I haven't wondered what happened to that building after the war. But what they did was they imploded it. And I found pictures on the internet where it all was caved in, you know. And they just destroyed it. But that was our main, like a Pentagon east or west or whatever you want to call it for over there. And it all was in a heap there. Now I think it's all gone now. They cleaned it up, but that whole area, that airport and stuff, they redid the whole thing, and you would never recognize it today as being the same place. Every so often I'll go in and look up pictures from over there, and I don't recognize anything anymore.
Wow.
It's just that changed that much.
Right. So you mentioned you don't remember much from leaving country.
Well, I remember we had to report. There's a place called Camp Alpha.
Okay.
It was in that Tonsanut complex there, and that's where they departed all the people on R&R and all those places. The weird thing I remember about that place was you had to take a drug test before you could go anywhere.
Okay.
And you had to give you a bottle and you go in this room, and then the weird thing was there was mirrors on the ceiling and mirrors on the wall and everything. So there's no privacy. And you had to take that test before you left country or left on R&R or wherever. And when we were ready to leave, I do remember this much, that you had to get rid of everything you had. Now, I would have loved to have kept my boots. But no, there's a bin. You threw all the boots in the bin. You threw all your uniforms in a bin. This and that, different bins. You threw everything in there. You weren't supposed to take anything back with you. At least it was that way when I left.
Wow.
Now, I've heard different stories that some people got to keep some of their stuff. But a different time, a different place, you know. And then we boarded a plane, I imagine. I can't remember boarding this plane. We took off, or the plane apparently took off. I guess it had to took off because we went to, I remember stopping in Japan. I don't know where in Japan. We stopped for a refueling flight on the way back home. And I remember the pilot saying, well, if we hit the jet stream, we'll go straight to San Francisco from Japan. Now that's a long, I think it was a 13-hour flight or something. It's a long time. But if we don't hit the jet stream, we're going to go up north and stop at Anchorage, Alaska.
Wow.
So we hit the jet stream. I wanted to go to Alaska just to say I've been there.
Oh.
But we never made it that far, and I was content to go into San Francisco airport. And so I think we didn't go anywhere else when we got there. You got off the plane from overseas and you went and got a ticket and boarded wherever you were going in the United States. I can't remember going to any place to process out or any of this stuff like we did when we went over.
Right.
And so you got on your plane and you headed, like, I don't know where I headed, probably to Omaha, I suppose. And then you were home. And then, or after you got to leave for a while, pretty soon you had a big box show up on your door that all your personal possessions over there you had to ship back at a different time. You had to pack them all up. And so I was just sitting on the porch going through that stuff, see what was all in there. But then after we got home, I got a leave. Then they assigned me to Fort Carson, Colorado. And in Fort Carson, they assigned me to the hospital there. And I said, what in the world am I going to do at a hospital? You know, I got no skills at a hospital. And so I stayed there for about a week, and they put me in a little room in the back of the hospital. And so I stayed in there, and eventually they said, well, we ain't got nothing here for you. We'll have to move you on. So they reassigned me to the 52nd Engineer Battalion, or 52nd Engineer Battalion at Fort Carson, Colorado. So I stayed there and then I finally realized how things had changed over the time I was gone. And it was just military was just a complete mess. They tried to get me to realize, no, I said, no, I'm not going to get involved in this stuff. Every other person was on some kind of drug or dope and
Wow.
and this kind of thing, and there's no discipline at all left. And so I said, it's time for me to bail out. When I wasn't much of a decision to make, but they made it for me after a while, because they said, well, we're cutting back on people. So we're cutting 6 months off on your entire enlistment. I'm like, okay, well, nothing I could do about it. So I took it, and So I got out 6 months early and packed up there and left and headed back to Nebraska. And that was about the extent of, never heard anything from the Army after that.
Wow. So what did you do after?
Afterwards, I took a job as a cook in a restaurant for a while. And then I decided, well, I got some benefits for education. So I decided to use my, back then they called it the GI Bill. I don't know what they call it today.
Yes, sir.
And use that. So I went to school down at Milford, Nebraska. And I took up heating and air conditioning in that school. Then I got a job. When I was through at school there, I got a job up at Stanton, Nebraska, working for the gas company. So I worked for them for 2 or 3 years in Stanton, and I said, I don't like Stanton. So I transferred to Norfolk, and then then I spent 43 years for the same company.
Wow.
But I changed my job. I changed to construction more than appliance repair business. And so I did that for 43 years and stayed there and retired a few years ago. And I thought, well, that's good. It's time to go. And that's where I'm at today.
That's fantastic.
I worked. I can't believe I stayed there that long, but it was time to go.
Do you think your military service prepared you for civilian life? Do you feel like you had an advantage over people who hadn't served?
Well, we got trained in a lot of different things, which has no application in civilian life. I got trained in how to blow things up and use dynamite and different things like that, but that's no application in today's world that I could see. But I did have the training on some of the stuff that was more fit to what I was doing later, my training on utilities worker and stuff, and then I worked for utility for 43 years. So I think there was some benefit to it.
How about like perspective or leadership skills?
Well, the thing about it was I never had anybody under me. Just 2 guys were over me. And so I didn't really interact with like most of these guys out here belong to a unit, a company, a platoon and all this stuff. I was never in that position where I got to know a lot of people. It was just us 3 that worked there, and we just couldn't, there was nobody else around. We each did our own little thing, and sometimes when I was at Vung Tau, I'd go into the base there or something. They had movies or something, and as soon as they're done, I'd leave base and go back to my little hole. And that's why today I do not know a lot of people from over there.
I think you had a lot more freedom in your AOR than most people that I've talked to.
But I tell you, I never got involved in any formations or roll calls or any of that stuff my whole time over there.
Wow.
I never, besides the first day I got there. And they, usually you're doing that every day if you're with a unit. If you're on a base, that is. But
it's a very unique experience. So since your team was so small, did you stay in contact with
What's sad to say, I didn't.
No.
And I often wonder this every so often of whatever happened to those guys. And I can't, some of them I can't even think of their names anymore. But no, I did not keep in contact. And when I worked in Canto, we worked with a lot of different nationalities. We worked with Vietnamese and Filipinos, Koreans, a lot of different, and then the civilian, that outfit that we were overseeing, that Pacific Architects and Engineers, was a civilian company. And I tried to find stuff on the internet about them, but I never could find anything hardly at all about them. I knew some of those people. And then we had Australians had a base there at Vung Tau, so every so often they'd have a party over there. They'd always invite us over, and they'd have a roast hog, and they'd bury it in the ground in banana leaves and cook it, and then we'd go over and eat. Then they did have beer over there, which was called Foster beer.
Yes.
And
interesting.
We had some of that, and that wasn't the lightweight stuff like we had to drink. They didn't believe in that. Another thing I was going to mention, that you don't think of this stuff while you're over there, but if I was in Saigon to get back, I took a plane sometimes. It was parked at Tan Son Nhut Air Base. And then I go to get in a plane, and you look over to the plane sitting alongside you, here it said Air America on it. Well, what was Air America? It was a CIA plane. They were called Air America over there. And we did visit some compounds. We thought we'd just stop in and see if we'd get something to eat when we were out in the field. And I'll never forget, these were all civilians in there, but you got to stare down when you went in there. They didn't know what to think of you. But they kind of got over it. We went on our way and never seen them again. So these are kind of some of the experiences that I had, but I don't. It's one thing you don't. I've heard many guys say this: they wouldn't trade it for anything, just to have that experience. There might be people out in the field that probably would not think the same way. Well, with the things they went through. But I didn't get involved in anything like that when I was over there. I knew about, you didn't know really what went on in country, except if you got your hands on a newspaper somewhere. All stuff there wasn't a communication. You could turn on a radio or turn on a TV and find out things, but you may not knew some things till after the war, what was going on. There was a lot of problems with discipline in some units, and there's the ugly side of all that was there was a lot of, I don't remember, I think I'd seen figures, but I can't recall how many people were killed by our own people. Just that they didn't want to do something, or it was quite a few. So that's the sad thing about it, that we've resorted to those tactics.
So do you find that out when you were still serving or after?
I knew some of what was going on, but some of these people didn't want anybody to get in their face. You know, they were hardcore, and you'd have a hard time. I could see you'd have a hard time making some people do things.
Right.
You know, and you know, if they did do it, your commanding officer might not, or have a good outcome. I don't know what else. But anyway, like I say, it was a good experience, and I could probably think of a lot more things I could say, but I don't, like I say, as you think of that stuff every day, it kind of fades out of your memory. But I touched on some of the highlights of what we were involved with. And
Well, Joe, you have one of the most unique stories I've ever heard from the war. I'm surprised that you had so much autonomy traveling around your AOR, and I've just never heard anything like it. I don't know, thank you for sharing your story
well, thank
of
you.
your military service. And unless there's anything else you'd like to say.
Well, it's probably time to.
All right. Thank you so much.